agree that we need to allow for the appropriate amount of time for construction on this project. So they've opened themselves up to a mid-year move. We're looking for a completion date somewhere around October of 24. So we should have about 20 months for construction. I think that that's going to be conducive to receiving the best possible bid by making it a project that's doable instead of condensing that window and trying to get them into that building at the beginning of the school year.
In the meantime, Mr. Chairman, the high school seniors will continue to duck to get down the hallway doorways. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, further questions? Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is a March construction date a little aggressive with the way things are going, or do you think that'll work out?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator, I'm having a trouble hearing you.
A little closer, please.
Let's put this a little closer. Is a March construction start an aggressive date, or do you think that'll be reasonable? It seems like it might be pretty tight turnaround there. Just wondering.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Costa, I think that it's a little aggressive, but I don't think that our intent is necessarily for them to jump right in with the actual construction. What we're most concerned about is getting the contractor on board and getting their submittals on the long lead time equipment due to the supply chain issues that we've got. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And a lot of it depends too on what kind of a winter we have, what kind of frost is in the ground, that type of thing. But we feel like we've provided plenty of flexibility in that schedule for the contractor to make some adjustments.
Yeah, and looking at the schedule, it seems completely appropriate to me as a design professional. So I think it's good timing too. That's when we want to start construction. We don't want to wait to the middle of the summer and lose half the summer. Okay. Committee, any further questions? Senator Landon?
Just as a point of reference, and I think it helps us to kind of remember this, we actually expedited that schedule in the last session. You might remember that. We had assistance from the Appropriations Committee. And that's what allows us to get that kind of start. And I agree with you. You and I serve on the Transportation Committee, and we know what kind of pressures are going to be on construction out there in these coming months. So I just wanted to underscore that point. I think that was good work on our part to allow for that project to get going.
Thank you. Director?
Mr. Chair, second item underneath number 5 is cost budgeting and cost per square foot. And Valerie Hughes is going to kick that off.
Valerie?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, there was a question or a request regarding including a weighted average. And as included in the packet, there is one graph that was included in the annual report that was a representation of weighted average by year for those projects contained. And then additionally, there was a question on a separate chart that was included. There was one data point that was $800 per square foot. That project is New Frontier Alternative High School in Lincoln County School District number 1. That is a small build. It's 4,300 square feet. And that was bid in February of 2022. It was approximately 15.5% over budget. This item was also something that was brought to the legislative floor for some additional funding and received an appropriation earlier this year.
Okay. Committee? Questions? Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, where do we stand on that project? Are we finishing up over there?
Ms. Hughes?
We're talking about the addition on the junior high school. Is that correct? Is that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, no, this is
No.
a new build in Lincoln County School District number 1.
Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
So maybe we can send some more information, but I really am curious how we got to $816 a square foot. I mean, that just seems, even for this market, to be impressively high. At least it was a relatively low square footage school. Looks like 4,300. I see it on the last page there. But what was there a lack of competition in the bidding, and 15.5% over budget? I guess we were anticipating something in that ballpark. I guess I'm just curious how we shattered the previous record by over $200 a square foot. I feel like I'm in the wrong business. I want to have built that school.
Obviously, there must have been some pressure. Either it's a remote location, it was bid at the wrong time of the year. There was no interest in the contracting community, maybe all of the above. Maybe the department could add some light.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, we can certainly go back and pull some more information on this particular project. I do remember offhand that all efforts were made to stay within the budget on this particular one. I think part of it was the timing. This was earlier this year where there were a lot of pressures still going on. In terms of other specifics though, and on the number of bidders, I'll certainly have to circle back with the committee with that information.
Senator Rothfuss.
So I think we need to be more thoughtful about rejecting bids. I don't think we do that very often, but it seems like you on an $800 bid award, you should surrender and try again and reconfigure and change the timeline and recognize that maybe things aren't going as planned. I think back to Laramie High School where it was a case of similar challenges where there was too much construction going on. Our bids were higher than we thought they should be, and we rejected the bid, and that ended up saving around $8 million, as I recollect, by rebidding, changing the timeline, and changing the approach. I know it's too late in this instance, but $800 a square foot, again, unless we were buying, well, I just can't think of any circumstances where $800 a square foot is a reasonable choice for us to make it without going back to the drawing board. Do we have, what's the process and how is this talked about when a district is facing that type of a budget? Why are we not pulling back and reconsidering?
It appears to me at 815, if we're only 15.5% over, that means the budget was somewhere just south of $700 a square foot. And so how that budget got set at almost double what we've been building schools elsewhere, good question. So maybe I know you won't have that data today, but maybe if you could bring it back to us and give us the extenuating circumstances that drove a nearly $700 a square foot budget, we'd appreciate that. John? Well, just a second. John?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I can't speak specifically to this project right now. I don't want to get too deep into the details. But generally speaking, I would say that when you've got a project that's only 4,400 square feet that requires the same types of expensive equipment that some of your larger buildings do, you know, that cost for that equipment doesn't get buried in a larger amount of square footage. And I think that comes into play. And I appreciate your point, Mr. Chairman, in regards to the scale here, because we're probably somewhere in the vicinity of $300,000 to $400,000 higher than what the anticipated hard bid was on the cost of this project. So it's a relatively small number. I know that that's nothing, that's not a small amount, but relatively speaking, that percentage for this building is much smaller in a dollar amounts than 10 to 15% would be over on a 30 or a $40 million project.
So I probably agree. I mean, the smaller the building, the higher the square footage cost is going to be. But there may be other extenuating circumstances like location, the bidding climate, the time of bidding. And so if they all weighed, if each one of those was a factor, then it could be a perfect storm. But I think we deserve a look at it. Representative Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say it's a spooky thing when you see the one data point on a graph that just kind of sticks out to you. But I can just tell you that it's similar to what the good chairman just stated. If you also have a situation where you have lack of contractors in the area and the lack of the availability to build a 4,300 square foot building. I mean, from what I was just calculating that was $3.5 million. That's kind of a small project, maybe for some of these contractors to want to come in. And so I had something very similar happen to me where I needed to pour a strip of concrete and the guy came in and he bid it probably 50% more than what I probably should have paid. And he flat out told me, I didn't want to do your job, but the only way I was going to do your job is if I, sent that money out there. So I think it's good that we have the fiscal responsibility to take a look at these things, but I also understand that the discussion last session was we needed to get this money finalized. We needed to get this going through. There was no real discussion about this prior to last year when it came into session and frankly, before our last meeting about this being over budget or anything along those lines. So I think we're well within our realm to look at this and say what's going on. But I think a closer examination earlier in the process would have been much more appropriate than coming down on the process at the end.
And if you look at the two other data points, well, actually, there's 4 other data points in 2022. 3 of them are 550 or more. So there's 2 other data points that are relatively high based on what we've seen in the past as well. So I think we just need further information and clarification. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I think further information and clarification. I know there are reasons. There's no question there are reasons, but it doesn't mean that we can't take action to mitigate those reasons, as well as look to alternative scheduling or alternative remedies. I mean, I can't imagine that when the most cost-effective remedy for this circumstance was being planned, that it was incorporating an $820 per square foot as the criteria on that most cost-effective remedy. And as far as it just being one outlier, I understand that, but you look from 2010 through 2020, we seem to have some semblance of cost control, although we had times where we did have the same internal competition, right? So you can see that in the scatter in the 14, 15 when we were building a lot, and that pushed things up a little bit higher. That is nothing in comparison. And we had small projects, we had big projects. There are things that are comparable to what we just did. And when folks moving forward are looking to what we're willing to pay, I mean, this is a public report, and this just said we'll pay $800 a square foot for a school. So what's my bid going to be when I'm the sole bidder? It's going to be $800 a square foot. Unless we do something about it, that's incumbent upon us. And I don't want to see another $800 a square foot bid that isn't rejected. So I hope we are thoughtful about this, and I'd like to see the details of this project. I'd honestly like to see the details of the projects that got up near 550. We're experiencing inflation, but this is beyond.
And one other factor that's I've warned against for a long time is as we had budget woes and the ability to provide public funded construction in the last few years, that puts a lot of our contractors out of business. They go away. So we've reduced our workforce when it comes to contractors, general contractors, subcontractors. These folks don't have work, they go out of business. And then so when we do have something, guess what? We go out of state. And when those contractors come into the state, costs them money to mobilize, costs them money to put their folks up in hotels, it just increases the cost. So not having a construction workforce in the state, I'm sure it's, again, part of this as well. Just a second, Senator, Ms. Hughes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I do have some additional information on this. This particular budget included asbestos abatement as well as a demolition of an existing building, which will drive up the cost there. In addition to that, there were 2 bidders on this project. The bid that was accepted was $500,000 over budget. The additional bid was 600,000 over that, so 1.1 million over budget.
Wow.
And then in terms of the couple other projects that you're seeing high bid per square foot, those projects include Afton Elementary School, Osden Elementary School, Osmond, and Coyote Ridge. And for each of those were in the same bidding climate at that time. And so I would say that additional dollars were given for each of those projects as well. And I do know for sure, I can't remember offhand if it was Afton or Osmond, but that one, the original bids were rejected and they put it out a second time and they came in even higher.
Yeah, certainly demolition and asbestos abatement typically are not in most project square foots budgets. And so, yeah, that would, so there's a lot of items that could affect a budget.
Honestly, Mr. Chairman, if we can, let's separate those out because those are not a construction project, and let's adjust this graph so that we have those as separate projects. If this is, it seems like it's an anomalous data point because we're including full project cost that isn't the construction dollars per square foot. And this chart, again, because others are going to be looking at it, this is something that is meaningful for bidders as we move forward. If we're not at $816 a square foot, but maybe the construction actually was, I don't know, 500 or something, which is more consistent with what we have for Coyote Ridge and the other 2 schools, I think we should remedy this graph and properly reflect that that was an aggregate of 3 projects instead of a single construction project. So we're comparing apples to apples there. I would appreciate that. And it's good to hear that it wasn't just the construction. Thank you.
Yeah. Senator Rothfuss, I tend to agree with that. That's good observation. Okay, any further comment on this? Okay, I think that there were, I think you have a directive there, Mr. Director. There were, I don't believe there are any other items on this point, so I'll open this item up to public comment. If anyone has any public comment. Hearing none, we'll close this topic and we'll move on to consideration of draft legislation. So I'll turn it over to staff. Tanya, you want to lead us through this?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. You requested a number of bill drafts at your last meeting. The first for presentation today is 23 LSO 233, and that's school facilities consolidated remediation schedule. And if you recall at your last meeting, Chairman Pappas, you requested this bill draft to eliminate the consolidated remediation schedule. Recall in February of 2022, the School Facilities Commission adopted new rules and regulations that encompassed a new method for creating the consolidated schedule. Historically speaking, a single schedule hasn't been presented to this body or to the legislature for purposes of making funding decisions. Previously, there was a capacity list and a condition list, and then a budget request based on the School Facilities Commission's review of that information. In response to that request, I also drafted what's in your packet. And if you look on page 1, line 11 through page 3, line 18, this amends 2115-117A. The substantive amendment can be found on page 2, lines 21 through 23, and onto page 3, lines 1 through 4. This deletes the requirement for the consolidated remediation schedule, and additionally deletes the rulemaking authority associated with that particular piece. I would note the commission maintains broad rulemaking authority, and this particular deletion on the top of page 3 is only relevant to the consolidated remediation schedule. Additionally, on page 3, line 10, you'll note that 2115-117A Romanet 6 is repealed. That is the single consolidated remediation schedule. And the text of that can also be found on page 4, lines 17 through 20, if you want to see the actual language that's deleted. This act is effective July 30th as on page, or sorry, July 1st, 2023, on page 4, line 27. So subject to your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any questions on this bill draft? Do we have someone online asking for a yes, Senator Hutchins, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want a clarification. The presenter said that this schedule is or rules have been written somewhere else. Can she tell me where that is written? I may have missed that during her presentation. That they're
Please.
repealing it in statute, but it's somewhere else with the new process.
Daniel?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, that's correct. In early 2022, the School Facilities Commission undertook extensive revisions of all of their rules and regulations, actually. And in response to some changes that were made in legislation in 2021, which sort of outlined this consolidated remediation schedule and called specific attention to it, they adopted a new process to prepare this consolidated list. And if you recall, at your last meeting in September, in the annual report, you received 3 lists: a capacity list, a condition list, and a consolidated list. And that was the first time anything like that has been presented to the committee, to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Further comments on this one? Okay, what we'll do is we'll go through all the bill drafts before we work any of them, and then we'll have public comment, and then we'll work them, okay? So could we move on to the next one?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. The next bill for your consideration is 23-234. This is the School Facilities Building Acquisition Bill. You'll note that there are actually 2 bills dealing with this topic. If you recall, at the last meeting, there was discussion about the elementary school utilized by Natrona County High School in the delivery of their required educational program that is commonly referred to as the School of the Deaf, or the School for the Deaf, excuse me, the School for the Deaf. And recall that a portion of that is owned by the city of Casper, and another portion is owned by the state. And the district leases that facility for purposes of educating their children. At that last meeting, this committee directed our office to prepare a bill draft for the relative parties at the state level to work with Natrona County School District in obtaining ownership to both of those pieces, both from the city as well as from the state. On the city side, and with regard to the school portion, I don't think that there's any statutory prohibition or mechanisms that would prohibit the school district from working with the city of Natrona and obtaining ownership of the portion owned by the city. You could utilize the funds that are already appropriated for land acquisition in your 2022 budget for that purpose. And the prohibition is actually on the state side. And that is within 9-2-2304 B Romanet 8. And if you look on page 3, lines 14 through to 35, this sort of outlines the requirements associated with disposition of any real property at the state level. And it requires anything in excess of $15,000 for a fair market value be appraised. And in light of that information, it would have prohibited the state from disposing of the portion that they own to Natrona County School District. So in section 1 is a non-codified section, both in A and B, commanding the School Facilities Commission, the State Construction Department, the Department of Administration and Information, and the State Building Commission to provide assistance at the request of the school district to obtain ownership of the noted facility. This act, as you can see on lines 40 and 41 on page 3, and then on page 4, lines 1 and 2, also requires reporting not later than September 1st of 2023 regarding the assistance required under this. And the act is effective immediately on page 4, lines 4 through 7. You'll note that I included a memo dated October 7th in your meeting material as well. LSO in writing this bill observed a couple of constitutional considerations that we wanted to draw your attention to. The first is under Article 3, Section 27, which is a special legislation. And then the second is under Article 2, Section 1. In response to those concerns, Chairman Pappas asked us to prepare a second bill draft. And I guess I'll pause there in case there are questions regarding that bill draft from the committee members or the memo.
Committee? Continue.
So moving on to the third bill draft, that is 23 LSO 298, disposition of real property. This is a broader approach than what you saw in the previous bill draft and amends existing statute 9-2-3202A to create a new definition for political subdivision, and then 9-2-3204B Romanet 8 to exempt any disposition of state property to a political subdivision as defined in this act from those provisions that I previously mentioned related to appraisal and requiring that it's disposed of at a fair market value. You can see the definition as created on page 2, lines 7 and 8, and that includes any county, school district, or special district within the state. I would note political subdivision is defined in a number of different manners under our state statutes. And really the one that you're trying to get at here is the school district. And again, in conversations with Chairman Pappas, this is sort of the language that he identified he would like to include.
So committee, I after going over the memo that that Tanya provided us and the information in that memo on Bill Ref 234 and its possible constitutional issues. Tanya informed me of this other alternative, and in my mind, it seemed a much cleaner solution. So I asked her to draft this bill knowing that this is our last meeting before we go into session, and I'll leave it for your discussion and thoughts, but I believe that we can go either way. We can go with what's the language in 234, which is what we directed last time. But I believe the solution that LSO came up with that's in 298 is cleaner, and it gets rid of the constitutionality issues. So like your thoughts on that. Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I appreciate Tanya's work and explanation. Especially appreciate you having this drafted so that we could at least have a conversation. One of the things I always do with these bills is try to get a feel for what sort of headwind you would run into. And I'm just looking at this yesterday. I was trying to think, well, you know, it makes sense when we sit on the select committee on school facilities, but where are the rocks going to come from that could break the windshield? And I'm looking on screen to the former chairman of appropriations, and across the way at my good colleague who sits on appropriations. I'm just wondering, you know, my scope doesn't go that far in terms of, I'm just trying to think of what entities are there unintended consequences from this bill that I haven't come up with. And generally, I'm supporting what we're doing here. I'm wondering if we're going to be able to take this out on the chamber floor and help our colleagues understand what we're doing.
Okay, so as was pointed out to me by staff, the definition is important in here, the political subdivision, because it's defined differently in many locations of statute. I believe there was over 10, 9, 11, something like that. 11 different places with 11 different definitions of political subdivision. So our definition here, so what we're doing here only relates to what we're defining here. And so we're defining means any county, school district, or special district within the state. So it's not necessarily school districts, right? Any special district can use this statute as well. So I think it's, I don't personally see any pitfalls in this language. I think it's, you know, I think it's pretty clear to me who can avail themselves of this particular statute. Again, I'm not an attorney, but Tanya, do you have any thoughts?
One additional item that I was remiss in mentioning, and that is, I think the State Building Commission, you can probably speak to this, Mr. Chairman, better than anyone, but I believe the State Building Commission is aware of this issue and was actually considering proposed emergency or rule changes to authorize this type of transaction, or perhaps an exemption process for the disposal of this particular piece of property from the state to the school district. And it was actually in conversations with their attorney generals that they pointed out this particular statute is what they believe is prohibitive of that transfer happening. But to your point, Senator Landon, yes, that's a great observation. This is a larger scope bill, and so it would certainly include items that perhaps, you know, are not in Natrona County disposition of property to other state entities for a nominal value, but it doesn't eliminate the requirement that those go through the State Building Commission and the other proper channels for disposition of state property.
And we were Representative Walters and I were going to have a commission or a State Building Commission meeting that we were going to attend on the 12th, but that got moved. I was going to bring it up to the commission, but that got moved till next Tuesday, and so we'll still bring it up to them. But I was hoping that we could get their, you know, temperature on it before we brought this to you, but the meeting got changed, and so.
So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Tanya's thoughts there. I think one of the things that we might want to be prepared with is, you might remember a couple of years ago when I chaired the Corporations Committee on the Senate side, we worked very hard on transparency measures. You know, and I think we did some really good work as a legislature to put some of those things in place. And I can see where someone might say, you know, this sounds good, but if a special district and blah, blah, you know, is that a way that somebody's going to get out from underneath having to be forthright and transparent in the purchase of something? I think this works, and I don't think we run into that problem, but I just want to make sure as we go forward that we don't have the concern come up that, well, you know, there's a reason why we have these hurdles in place and these bid processes and all of these things. I don't know if that's making sense or not. I'm looking around at the rest of the committee and, you know, maybe I'm concerned about something that's not gonna come.
I don't believe my intent was, I don't believe the intent was to make it less transparent. I don't know what notice is required and maybe we need to put something in there for that, but I don't think the intent was to make it less transparent.
Right.
The intent was to make it feasible, just
No.
to do this.
I agree.
So
I agree.
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, what about the possibility, and I didn't anticipate that this would be a problem. I assumed it would be, you know, from the state to the state, and that would be just a reassignment of ownership. But I see the concern that's presented in the memo. We do this kind of thing, though, realistically from a budgeting standpoint all the time. And the bill that would be the school CapCon bill is effectively buying and selling of property or construction of property through specific budgeting, which gets around any of the specificity concepts. So we could put a provision in our CapCon bill that says we'll do a project. And that project could be, we could appropriate some random number, $100,000. I have no idea what a valuation would be. So we could come up with that estimate through the SBC. What is the estimated value of this transferred asset? We could appropriate it through the CapCon bill to the school district. And then we could recoup the exact same appropriation from the budget that's receiving the sale in the same appropriation bill. So it's a zero value net appropriation, but it's fully constitutional. It's fully consistent with the CapCon bill. It does the same thing, and it's a transfer of ownership. At that point, we don't need any additional legislation. We just need 2 lines in the CapCon bill instead of a separate bill. So I think that would probably work. I'd look to staff and the school facilities to see if we can do that. I don't want to, I'm not enthused about changing the statute with the potential unintended consequences, as Senator Landon was saying. If we can just do an internal purchase from ourselves and all the money, you know, it's just put money from one pocket into the other pocket, you move on with life.
Seems a little bit, in my book, convoluted, a little bit more difficult, less transparent, actually, in my mind. But certainly that can be done that way. I guess I don't have the concerns that Senator Landon has, but.
Mr. Chairman, I think that first of all, there's the possibility of the bill failing.
That's true.
Right. I don't think anyone's going to have any problem in the legislature of the disposition of this piece of property. So there's in my expectation, zero resistance to the idea of transferring ownership of an asset from one part of the state to another part of the state, which is effectively what we're doing to facilitate the use of it by the Trona County School District. Everyone's going to go along with that. From a transparency standpoint, it's literally 2 explicit lines in a budget bill that can be linked together. I don't see any problem with transparency from that standpoint. Convoluted, sure, but I don't think it's complicated. It's just a way of us internally accounting for what has to be openly and explicitly accounted for based on the provisions of the memo. And again, it's the kind of thing that's consistent with how we budget and how we transact within the budget. So I think it's very straightforward.
Mr. Chairman, I'd love to, not to put him on the spot, but the former chairman, I'd love to get Representative Walters' thoughts on how this thing would play. And I see Representative Harshman has his hand up too, and would appreciate their perspective because they've sat longer on appropriations than I have.
Okay, we'll go to Representative Harshman and then to Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a good conversation. We're trying to solve a problem. So I think this is an easy story to tell to our colleagues on the floor of the legislature. I think the bills, first, I like the first draft because it spells out the problem you're trying to solve, but it would be, I think, you never know how that'll get to the finish line and if it will, and particularly with the current governor's previous lawsuits, some of these things, you just never know what kind of weird things can happen when you're rounding third base and coming home with the thing. And then the other bill, I think Senator Landon brought up a very good point. I hadn't even thought about it. I mean, where does this take this into the future? And so how can you solve this problem? And I think Senator Rothfuss really, probably laid it out the easiest, the most straightforward, and probably the most transparent. This is a one-time thing. It's not, I've never heard of us really transferring property like this ever before. It's a one facility issue that was built long before any of our time. And now we're trying to modernize and solve a problem. And I think this is a simple deal right in the budget and an easy story for us to tell. There is no money involved. It's just going to be right hand to the left hand. And so and then we'll have a better management of a facility as we move forward. So I think, and I hadn't thought really about the budget amendment. I think it's a good idea. And maybe, I think at this point, sit in our short conversations, probably the best way to go. And at the very least, I think you should have two horses in this race. So if we choose a bill draft, I think we also run with the budget approach as well, because invariably one of those horses will break its leg and not finish. So I thank Senator Rothfuss. I think it's a good idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss beat me to the punch on his idea of doing it through the budget. I like the drafting of the good chairman's bill. I don't like the permanency of making that change for really one property its need. If this was an issue we were addressing almost every session where we were trying to transfer state property to one agency to the next, I would certainly be on board for it. But where this is a once in a blue moon type of a situation, I like maybe more convoluted, the more do it once approach as opposed to changing statute to do it. And then in the first draft in 234, just due to the constitutional issues that do come up, I think the budget amendment is probably our simplest, easiest form to get this, to accomplish this.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Landon.
I appreciate, thank you for that opportunity to have a discussion. I think the other thing that this avoids is any discomfort that a member might have about, well, now we're talking about getting rid of state property and we're giving it to a local government entity. I like the idea that we could, through the budget process, this is kind of a one-time thing. This bill creates a situation where we could be bringing something up every session, for example. So I appreciate maybe where we've landed today. So,
Committee, any further comments? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Believe it or not, I am in agreement with Senator Rothfuss, Representative Harshman, Senator Landon, and Representative Walter on this one. So they'll have my vote to X the first bill and do this through the budget process. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First and second bill, and send this through the budget process. Thank you.
Okay. Could I ask staff to comment on this?
Mr. Chairman, I think we can certainly operationalize the budget amendment as stated by Senator Rothfuss. And one potential avenue for you to take or vehicle for you to take is, I mean, obviously you have
And what they were trying to do is a little scary.
you have 234, which we've discussed, but we'll also discuss later in the day, 232, LSO 232, which is the supplemental K-12 school facilities appropriations bill. And you could amend it to have those two footnotes that were cited by Senator Rothfuss. And as I understand it, you would pay fair market value in accordance with the noted statute, but sort of moving money from the right pocket to the left pocket, so to speak.
Okay, so we'll look at doing that, but before we do that, before we take any action on working these bills, I would like to open it up to public comment. If anybody has any public comment on the bill drafts that we discussed, please come forward. Okay. Hearing none, we'll close public comment. Committee, let's talk about the consolidated remediation schedule 233. What's your pleasure on that one? Okay, it's been moved by Senator Landon.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Rothfuss. Any discussion? Senator Jenkins, did you have looks like you're going for your mic?
Yeah, thank you, Mr.
Or
Chairman.
Representative Jenkins, excuse me.
Could we run back through, being the new member on here, could we
Sure.
run back through why we'd want to take this away from the commission? The problem that we're trying to solve.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We created a problem a couple of years ago, and now we're trying to undo the problem is more accurate than a problem being solved. Prior to a few years ago and us changing the statute, there would be a list of capacity concerns and a ranking of capacity concerns, usually on a district basis, but as well as a school basis. And those were related. And then condition scores would come up on a separate list. There was discussion a few years ago about how nice it would be to have one unified prioritization list. And so we ended up amending statute with the desire to have one uniform list and to find a way to add apples and oranges together, jam them together into some lovely smoothie, I guess. That was a problematic smoothie that never really came together because there isn't a way rationally to combine a condition score and a capacity score. They're each unique problems. You can have unconditional or you can have unconstitutional circumstances in condition, but you can have a great capacity score, right? 50% capacity. Put those two together, the school looks fine. On the other side, you can have a brand new school that's at 150% of capacity. You've got real problems there, but you put the two scores together and now all of a sudden everything looks fine. This puts it back effectively to how it was, where we just need to see both lists and identify criticalities of condition or criticalities of capacity and address those on a separate basis. That's the motivation for this piece of legislation.
Basically, we made it less flexible. Very much less flexible. Okay, any other comments, committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line 2 on page 1. I'm thinking that S, and I'm sure somebody probably already has caught it, needs to probably be removed.
I've already, prior to this meeting, I already passed that on to staff, and so I caught it earlier, so that's already been corrected, so. Yeah, Representative Harshman.
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman. I think my question's answered. Thank you.
Okay. Any further comments? Okay, hearing none, could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote on 23 LSO 0233 school facilities consolidated remediation schedule. Senator Hutchings,
Aye.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Landon, Senator Rothfuss, Representative Banks, Representative Harshman,
Aye.
Representative Jennings, Representative Walters,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Brown, Chairman Pappas.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 10 ayes and 0 noes.
Okay, thank you. We'll see that one again in session. Okay, let's move on to, we'll take the two bills, 34 and 28 discussion together. We'll forward one or the other or neither. I think Representative Harshman made a comment that we ought to at least forward one of them so that if we don't do the budget amendment issue, at least we have a bill to forward. So I'll take recommendations on which one we ought to go with. Senator Rothfuss.
They don't seem mutually exclusive, although there's a little bit of redundancy if you were to pass them both in terms of what they do. It almost seems like if we want something just as a vehicle, that from the title standpoint, we'd want them both put together into one bill, pass that, and then set it aside and probably not use it. We might then want to amend it in session, but really if it's a vehicle bill so that we can accomplish the objective, that's what I would do. Is combine them.
Could I ask staff if that's possible?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I think they are somewhat mutually exclusive only to the extent that the second bill, if 298 were passed, it would eliminate the need for 234. There would be no prohibition to disposition of the facility for a nominal or a zero value.
Mr. Chairman, I absolutely agree with that, but the challenge that I would have if we were using this as the vehicle and for some reason choosing not to go with the budget approach is I think that the legislature overall would be more amenable to the one that has some constitutional concerns. In other words, the one-off provision would be more well-liked, but has the problems that the second bill solves. And it seems that looking for or having the opportunity for creative solutions that thread the needle and instead of opening things wide as 298 would do, trying to find a narrower solution would require that the bodies of both pieces of legislation move forward. But I absolutely agree with Ms. Hydrick that I wouldn't necessarily want to pass that bill as it would then look, because you would only need the second bill to do the
Senator
first.
Rothfuss, the option is we could pass both of them separately rather than trying to combine them. Pass them both separately and set them both aside and hope we just do it through the budget bill. And then during session, we can decide if we're not doing it in the budget bill, which one of the two would best work for us at that time. But it's an option.
And Mr. Chairman, I think, that's certainly an option from a title standpoint. While redundant, they're not in conflict. You could have one bill and then work with all of the pieces if you had them combined. And that would give you the ability to do the first bill and have some statutory flexibility through the second bill to enable the first bill and narrow the scope, which is, I think, what would probably likely be preferred by the body. And I mean, and the way to do that would simply be move either bill, amend the other bill into it, and only work one bill.
Any other comments, Senator Cost?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering if we could hold off on any one of those until we talk about the budget, the bill, and if we go ahead, then we could proceed rather than. I
think
mean, that would
I-
make
I-
more sense than trying to decide this now.
I think my feeling is we're going to do it in the budget bill anyhow. So I don't know that we need to wait for this. Because I think at least the feeling I get is that we're going to include that in this when we get down to the budget bill.
Mr. Chairman, one of the cautions that we're all aware of is that we do get a lot of bills flying around and it sounds to me like this upcoming session's going to have a lot of bills. And so if you put two in place of one,
Okay.
you know, do you get them all to the floor? That's the challenge. You got to just.
Okay.
have-
So
Yeah, I that's why I
can
favor.
I have a motion?
um,
Oh,
Thank you,
Representative
Mr.
Walters.
Chairman. I would move draft 0234. And if I get a second, I'll explain my rationale.
Okay.
My rationale here, Mr. Chairman, is this is the less permanent form of accomplishing our goal than the other bill. Changing the statute entirely for this one-off situation is, as I expressed my concern earlier, I don't think is necessary. So this would accomplish our goal. If it does have issues, I think we can correct those between now and the end of session via the multiple hearings and multiple hearings on the floor, each body as well. So that's why I would move just that bill forward and not the other one at this time. And thank you for the second from the senator.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Any comments on the motion? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
And again, all it would take if we want the other language is to move to amend it in at this point. And I appreciate the representative's thoughts. He wants the clean one. I'm fine with that. But if anybody prefers all of the above, this would be the time. Everyone seems okay where we're going. Representative Harshman.
Okay, so no other further comments? Okay, question on the bill. Roll call, please.
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 0234, school facilities building acquisition. Senator Hutchings,
Down.
No,
Thumbs down.
no.
Senator Cost,
Aye.
Senator Landon, Senator Rothfuss, Representative Banks, Representative Harshman,
Aye.
Representative Jennings, Representative Walters,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Brown,
No.
Chairman Pappas.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, you have 9 ayes and 2 noes. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. So that bill draft is passed. Is there any inclination to continue on with the second bill draft? Okay, I see none. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that section, consideration of draft legislation. We're about 45 minutes ahead of schedule, 40 minutes ahead of schedule. Do you want to continue on and or do you want to break early for lunch? What is your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Were we scheduled to do the supplemental after lunch?
Yes.
I don't think we should do it early because I think people will be tuning in specifically for that. And I think they would miss. our
That's not
discussion.
scheduled till 1:30 though.
Sounds awesome.
Okay. So we'll take lunch break until 1:30. That's okay. Senator Landon, did you have a?
Mr.
comment?
Chairman, one suggestion, we could announce now that we're going to start a little bit early this afternoon, and that would give people time to get up to speed and be ready to hear that bill at 1 o'clock. Just a thought. That's a good idea.
Okay, we could do that. Look like we'll come back at 1 o'clock. Everybody's good with that? All right, so we'll stand in recess until 1 o'clock. Thank you.